Welcome to episode 181. 181 of Awkwardly Awesome Podcast. I'm deeply excited to have a conversation with my guest today. But before that, it's inspiring, People around the globe are envisioning, creating, and working hard to find more effective solutions that lead humanity along the path to a kinder, more inclusive world for all of us and for future generations. Sometimes that gets lost in all the problems of the world, but I believe that's really happening. And a few weeks ago, I welcomed DJ Nicholson to the show, and this week I welcomed Beth Kessler. Both of these amazing people are doing their part to ensure people who are often sidelined and overlooked get included and valued in our communities. I'll tell you more about my guests in a sec, but first this.
Today's guest, Beth Kessler.
Welcome back. Beth's journey to the work she's doing now involved navigating a situation that could have left her feeling alone, left out, and adrift. She describes it like this: when I left Oregon, should know how to pronounce a name of a state. When I left Oregon, I wasn't sure who I was professionally anymore. I knew what I believed in. I kind of knew what my skills were, but I was part of such a close community that it was like I knew who I was in the community, but maybe not outside of it. And then slowly I made connections and felt like maybe my people weren't only in Oregon. Maybe the work I wanted to do could be done here too. Beth met new people, felt accepted in her new community, and began her own business, Align Consulting Collaborative. A major part of her work is helping people who experience intellectual or developmental disability to feel included in groups in their communities. Another aspect of her work encourages a shift in perspective and support as people around the country in all walks of life recognize that including people with disabilities in groups and communities is a great win-win-win for all involved. Please, without further ado, help me welcome Beth Kessler. Yay! Thanks for being here, Beth.
Thanks for having me.
So often I like to start off talking to my guests about the childhood, because I think it's so fascinating, a childhood vision of ourselves, and then how that progresses into our adult lives. So if I had known you when you were 7 and asked you, hey Beth, what do you think you want to be when you grow up? What would you have said?
I'm pretty sure around 7, I was saying I wanted to be a singer, a doctor, a mom, and maybe also a veterinarian.
So you had a busy adult life planned for you.
Apparently.
So so tell me about singing. Singing. What does singing mean to you?
Singing was probably the first thing I can remember loving so much that I just wanted to do it all the time.
Mm.
I would sing to the point where people were really tired of it. I used to ask my family often in the car, "Do you want to hear a song?" And their first question would be, "Is it a real song or a made up song?" Because
Oh.
real songs had endings and made up songs did not. It just went and went and went. And singing stayed a huge part of my life for a very long time. For a short period of time, around 17 years old, I thought I was actually going to be a professional singer. Um, and by the time I hit 18, I had kind of moved on from that. Um, and singing didn't really stick with me past college, though I'm still an avid car singer.
Um. What creativity little kids have. In the car, you could make up a song that would go on and on and on.
Indefinitely. I used to do that to get my daughter to sleep when she was an infant too. I would just start singing something and go and go and go until she was snoring.
Does your daughter, does she like singing?
She does. She enjoys singing at the top of her lungs any chance she gets.
I bet your parents kind of laugh a little bit.
Oh, yeah. I think they all enjoy it.
So at 18, you had a possible path of being a professional singer, and then you chose a different path. Huh? What went into making that decision?
It's funny. I don't remember exactly when it changed. Um, but at some point around 18, I decided that my future was either going to be a fashion designer or a social worker.
A fashion designer, social work.
Yep,
Those are two careers very unique from each other.
they are. And so I looked at colleges. I distinctly remember looking at colleges that had strong social work programs and those that had strong fashion design programs. And by the time I was done looking at colleges, I had pretty much decided that uh, social work was the path for me. And I was pretty sure that I wanted to work with children. And I just remember, everyone asks you at that stage of your life, what do you want to do? Why do you want to do it? And I remember just saying, I just want to help people. I just And in my mind, a social worker was a helper. It was the job that was a helper. Um, and it didn't take me very long to realize there are lots and lots of ways to help people.
Hmm.
Um, and that a strict social work path maybe wasn't the path for me, but being a helper was. And I just had to figure out what kind of helper I wanted to be.
What do you love about the feeling of helping people?
It's kind of core to me. I remember taking a class, a quiz once in adulthood as part of my career that it was a core gifts assessment. Core gifts comes out of asset-based community development. And it's the idea that there are things so innate to us, they're different than skills. They're not things we're good at. They're things that are just fundamental to who we are. and they show up in the best of us and they show up in the worst of us. And for me, part of what I discovered in that was that it is foundational in me to want to make sure that people I interact with feel heard and seen. And part of that is not making assumptions. And part of that is really listening to people. And part of that is creating spaces where people feel comfortable enough to authentically be who they are and say what they think. And so that has just been a fundamental part of who I am, is valuing that. I value it in other people when they do it for me. And I think it is core to who I am, is wanting to do that. And when you do something that aligns with who you are, it just feels good.
It just feels good. You said this core thing shows up in the best of us and in the worst of us. What you've just described sound like the best of humanity. How could it possibly show up in less wonderful ways?
For me, I think it shows up in a fear of holding people accountable sometimes. Because I never want to communicate with someone in a way that makes them feel shut down or criticized. And there are times in life where we have to hold people accountable. I do it in parenting. I do it with my family members, with my husband, and we do it in work, right? I mean, changing systems, changing culture, changing practices of organizations, it all starts with the idea that something isn't working the way it should, which is in and of itself critical. And so I think to do that well, I have to sometimes wrestle with that assumption that I make of myself, that there is a difference between accountability and criticism, and that accountability is a helpful thing. And it's possible without entering into judgment, criticism, and shutting people down.
Sound like a powerful line to learn more and more about, like accountability and criticism. It just seems like that there would be a lot of communication skills when one could keep learning and learning again to walk that line the way one wants to walk it.
Absolutely. And I would say that's another place that it probably shows up in the worst of me, is in that constant self-vigilance and kind of self-assessment. Am I walking the line? Where have I overstepped the line? And what repair do I need to do when I've overstepped the line? But honestly, I think there's also a lesson in that. It's part of the work we do, is trying to help other people and other organizations figure out how to do that self-reflection, how to acknowledge harm, and how to do repair work when they recognize harm done.
So this gets in naturally to systems. If most every human wants to make a difference, wants to be kind, how then how then do systems get to be so misguided sometimes? How then do systems lose their way, do you think?
I think we all do sometimes. I think when things are hard, it can be very hard to see a path forward. And systems exist in hard, right? Systems exist to be kind of a safety net for people, and that's hard. Um, and systems often aren't set up to support well the people who work in them. I mean, the reality is human systems, human services are made up of humans, and they all have complexity and context to their lives. And none of us can show up as the best version of ourselves with the best problem solving and compassion when we aren't getting the support we need to do that. And so I think there are a few areas where we start to lose the connection between our intent and our impact. Um, that's where the name of the consultancy came from. Aligned. It's about helping to create space and structure and opportunity for people to breathe and kind of step away from what is in this moment so that they can refocus on what was it I set out to do? What is the intent of this system? What is the intent of this service? What is it we're either trying to help people do or help people avoid doing? And then are all of our practices and all of our structures set up in alignment with that? And the answer probably is no. And so then the question becomes why? And what would it take? Right? I often ask the question, I'm less interested in how can we? And I'm more interested in what would it take to do this? Because how can we assumes that we already know the answer. And if we already knew the answer, we'd be doing it. What would it take, I think, allows us to imagine. Like, maybe I don't see that what it would take feels possible right now, but I could see what it would take. So then we just break it down layer at a time. If I can think about what it would take to accomplish what I intend to accomplish, then we can look at it a little bit separately from what is and say, how do we address the barriers? How do we get around what feel like barriers? Or how do we get creative and brainstorm and come up with something we haven't come up with before?
So by switching the question you ask about a challenge to what would it take, it provides a new perspective, and from that perspective, new answers start coming in, and new actions, new answers that indicate new actions.
In my experience, it at least starts moving the conversation in that direction.
Powerful. In my experience with human service organizations, stress when sometimes when a problem is trying to be, or when the organization wants to solve a problem, the stress of each member working on the problem becomes higher and higher and higher and higher and higher. So how do you work with your clients in terms of helping them manage the stress in a different way?
I really come to this work, as do my partners. I'm not alone in this. I have two fantastic founding partners, Emily Wild Turner and Jenny Turner Wilson. And we all approach the work from a human to human place first. I think once you establish relationship and you start to establish trust human to human, you can tackle pretty much anything together. But I don't think we often enough start with human to human. I'm going to get to know you and let you get to know me so that we can trust each other enough and feel safe enough having hard conversations. So I think that's where we start. We always start with, who are our clients? Let's get to know them as people and let them know us, right? We don't have to be this kind of expert on all things superhuman consultant to be valuable to them. It's much more valuable to create a space where someone feels like they're working alongside a friend. Because then you can start a conversation with, what's going on for you today, rather than what do we have to accomplish today. You can accomplish much more, I believe, when you start with authentic relationship. And we do that in all of the work that we do. It extends beyond the client, right? It's like, we so often hear human service organizations talk about stakeholder engagement. Well, we shift that to say community-led planning and problem solving. So who is the community? Who is impacted by what's happening? Who cares about what's happening? And let's start to build some trust and transparency and authentic relationship there so that people feel safe and comfortable telling us the truth and talking about vulnerable life experiences. Human services exist in vulnerable spaces. So without a feeling of trust or safety, which I think comes from authentic reciprocal relationship, I don't think people have the opportunities to lead in all of the ways that makes for the best systems change.
What does starting to build the authentic relationship look like? Does it look like going to the movies with someone, or going to play a golf game?
In my work, it generally doesn't. In community development and community organizing work, I think it does. It's about finding shared interests and building relationship from shared interest. But I think it also comes from shared life experience. And that's usually where I start. I work with people across the country. I can't necessarily go to a movie, or even my preference, go out for coffee with them. But I can start conversations with them about what's going on in their day, how their family is, what are the stressors at work right now, what's motivating your action. Because getting to understand the context of somebody's life helps you better understand their motivation and how they make decisions. And I think it helps you better understand how to connect with somebody. And I sometimes create that space by offering the vulnerability first, sharing with people a little bit about what's going on for me that day or that week, or how the news last night is impacting me today. I think starting just human to human conversation can result in, we don't need to schedule a weekly check-in, because when something comes up, I know you're going to call or text me. And I know that you're going to respond because we have an established relationship. So for me, it really just comes down to how we talk to each other and the things we talk about. Because I really honestly believe context impacts what we do and how we do it and why we do it. So let's start by understanding the context.
Would you typically spend an hour talking to someone about their lives?
I think it depends on the situation.
Mm.
When it comes to a client, I'm used to working with people who feel like they're being pulled in 1,000 directions. So they're probably going to resent it if I spend an hour only talking about what's happening for them or what's happening for me. But making sure that's the first question. Um, Sometimes I catch myself if I'm really busy and I'm really stressed and I have back-to-back meetings, I'll start a meeting with the agenda. And then I'll usually pause and say, "I'm sorry. How are you today?" And sometimes it's just that, right? But it's that repeatedly. Um, when I do have the opportunity to work with people in person, I think it's using the time. It's going to dinner at the end of a meeting and talking about how the meeting felt, not just what was done. Um, it's grabbing coffee before a meeting or offering to pick coffee up for someone and bring it to them, recognizing they had a long commute that day. Um, I think it's just being mindful and looking for opportunities to come across as more than just um, a hired colleague.
So it becomes not just two people doing a transaction to solve a problem. It becomes community. It becomes inclusive of who a person inclusive.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think often our connections with each other are transactional. And you can have a transactional relationship and accomplish something, but you aren't necessarily going to choose to do it again. I think if you can have an opportunity to get something done together and enjoy it along the way, then why not do more? Right? Why not take that success and amplify it and grow it and turn it into another one? And when something isn't working, why not approach that person that you had that feeling of safety and comfort with and say, "I'm feeling stuck. This thing isn't working." Um, just admitting something isn't working is pretty vulnerable.
Just to recap, what you're talking about doesn't take all day, but it takes intention. Like starting a meeting, I'm curious about how these other humans are doing. I'm curious about how the family is. Just starting with a little curiosity, and it's not like, yeah, it doesn't take all day. I know what this segues into something you're absolutely passionate about. Inclusion. And sometimes I have to admit I get stressed out when I think about having to include spend so much time with inclusion, and it could be overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think thinking about changing something about yourself or what you do um, can be overwhelming, right? In part because we aren't all aware, we aren't all conscious of all the things we do. Um, so you're asking yourself not only to pay attention to what you're doing, but then to be willing to do it differently. And so that can feel really overwhelming. I think it comes down to motivation, though. Like, I went to a really phenomenal asset-based community development training years ago. John McKnight and Diamond Hargis talking
Mm.
about the difference between including and welcoming. And that including people, sometimes it even becomes a jargony word. It's like going above and beyond and making special accommodations. But welcoming people means being open and curious and warm and just wanting people to feel accepted and safe. And I think if we break it down to motivation, what do you want people to experience? Do you want people to experience a sense of safety with you? Do you want people to feel valued with you? Do you want people to feel that they have to change who they are to be with you? And I think often we think about inclusion that way. Like, we can get people ready to be included, which really just means we can help people change who they are so that they can be more accepted by other people, instead of welcoming, which is we can create spaces and come together in ways that that just feel safe and warm and open. And if we approach people with curiosity, we will figure out how to make sure those spaces continue to be safe and welcoming and open. And I think part of that is trusting people's lived experience that's different than yours. What I feel safe entering might be very different than what someone else feels safe entering. So I think the demand and the part that maybe feels hardest is being willing to accept that even if you feel comfortable somewhere, there might be other people who don't. So just because I feel welcome doesn't mean everyone feels welcome. That can be hard to grapple with, I think. But I also think it's a much more effective place to start a conversation.
Can you please say some more about how do we approach each person we meet with curiosity?
I learned a lot recently from a few people that I worked with in Oregon, actually, about the term cultural humility, and that we tend to use different words. We tend to use words like cultural competence, which means I'm going to learn about other people's cultures enough that I'm competent in understanding it. Cultural humility is more about I'm going to approach people recognizing that my experience and theirs are different. And that as much as I think I know about them and their experience, I could be wrong. And so I think that's kind of the underlying assumption that helps you approach people with curiosity. Like, if you assume you already know everything about somebody, you're going to end up making a lot of assumptions about them. But if you approach people assuming there are things about them in their life that you don't understand, I think you naturally approach people with curiosity and a more open mind.
So that this is only the second time we've talked in person ever. And so, like you're saying, we couldn't make loads of assumptions about each other, or else we could realize, hey, we've lived whole lives. We know hardly anything about each other. So why not ask questions? Like I had no idea until this conversation that you love to sing and create endless songs in the car.
They did never end. I'm sure it was very frustrating for my sisters and parents.
So speaking of welcoming, you recently moved across country, and what was it like So what did you do as you moved across country to help create create a scenario where you could be welcomed, and what have people done to welcome you?
It's a great question. I mean, I think moving in general is hard.
Uh,
um,
and
moving
not
to a place
only packing, which
that by
awful.
itself. um, but then moving to a place where you really don't know anyone at all is hard. And doing that during a global pandemic is really hard.
Mm,
Um, I don't know that I really did anything other than continued to try.
mm,
Um, my the first thing I did when we moved here um, was rely on the people I knew in Oregon to connect me with people they knew on this side of the country. And not all of that was fruitful. I sent a lot of emails. I made a lot of phone calls, some of which were returned, some of which weren't. Um, and I don't tend to be a person who is very outgoing, um, contrary to being on a podcast. I have a hard time making conversation usually. And so those first, like, kind of like blind dates, like you're on the phone with somebody because somebody else connected you with them, um, were awkward. And I didn't necessarily want to keep doing it, but I
mm,
kept doing it because I was determined to not feel totally by myself here. And I was determined to still find a way to do the work that I loved doing in a way that I felt like was really making a difference that aligned with my values. And I was struggling to find that. So I listened to a lot of recommendations and referrals that did not align with what I wanted. And I
mm,
listened to them with a smile and a thank you.
mm,
And then I moved on and did it
mm,
again. And eventually I had a Zoom call actually with the Arc of Virginia, who are now a client. And the conversation was easy.
mm,
Um, they said things I agreed with. I said things they agreed with.
mm,
We asked each other interesting questions about the
mm,
work and the community and what was needed and what wasn't working. Um, and it really only took that one for me to start feeling hopeful. And it was all virtual, right? It was all on the phone. I think I lived in Virginia for a year before I saw the bottom half of anybody's face except my family. um,
yeah, so challenging.
and and then it was the first. I started doing some work with the Arc of Virginia, and I attended their annual convention, which they hadn't had in years because of COVID. And I attended the convention to support it as part of my work. And they had created a welcoming event. I, along with the attendees, felt valuable for being there.
Mm,
Um, people were curious to get to know me.
mm,
And I remember saying to a woman there, I feel like I found my people. None of
mm.
you live where I live, but I feel like I found my people. Um, and that gave me a little more
Because you
opportunity.
mean because they lived all over Virginia, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, and I feel like that kind of turned the tide for me a little bit. It's amazing what feeling welcome in a space can do for your general perspective on humans.
Mm, I think for many reasons, probably because I want to talk about this next, probably is with the Arc of Virginia, but the IUN campaign.
It
Would
is
you
awesome.
please talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. Um, so it's a campaign that was funded by the Governor's Board on Developmental Disabilities in Virginia.
Mm,
The Arc of Virginia partnered with a really amazing videography and marketing company
yeah.
called Selfies.
Called what?
And they're called Selfies Media. The creator, the person who started the company, his name is John Selfies. And he used to work in the disability field. He was a person who provided direct support, so a direct support professional. And he recognized what I recognized, which was this is a diverse community of people who are not being seen or heard. And all people deserve to be seen and heard. And his way of addressing that was to start Sylphie's Media and try to tell stories. And so the Arc of Virginia created this campaign called Are You In? And it stands for Are You Inclusive? And there's a website, there's a social media presence, there's stuff. I should have worn my t-shirt. I have a t-shirt and a hat and a mug. And it's just this phenomenal campaign that encourages every person in their own sphere of influence to be welcoming. It asks people to recognize that some people don't feel welcome, they don't feel seen, they don't feel heard. And it gives people suggestions and tips on what you can do to change that. Not for the world, not for a human service system, but just in your own life and in your own sphere of influence. If you're a person who lives in a community, you contribute to what the culture of that community is, and you can help make that community a welcoming place. If you're an employer, you have the opportunity to create a welcoming space, a welcoming company or organization. If you manage housing, right, you have an opportunity to see that not all people have equal access and do something about it. And so the website is youcanbeinclusive.org.
And it's right there.
Right there on the screen in front of us. There are resource guides to help people kind of figure out what they can do, and lots of just phenomenal stories that people with disabilities have been willing to share about their lives, about their hopes, and also about the very real barriers that unintentionally humans create because our intent and our impact are not aligned. So it's a really phenomenal campaign. Hopefully it's going nationwide now. We have people from all over the country signing the pledge that they are in.
You just had someone from South Dakota sign it.
I love seeing that. I love the way it spreads. Yeah, so that's our goal, that everybody can say, I'm in.
It's just an extraordinary website. I encourage everyone to go, and there's a few things there are many things on the website that I want to talk about. We won't get to them all, but one is there is a narrative about people with disabilities that they are heroes or long-suffering saints. These narratives are false. People with disabilities are simply people with all the diversity of experience, personality, and preferences as anyone else. There is no need to patronize people with disabilities or imply that they are courageous or special. some may find it offensive because they are just living their everyday lives.
It is such a common experience that people share, that the perception someone else holds is that the value of their life is to inspire someone else. It is amazing if part of who you are can be inspirational to other people. Phenomenal. But it's not the entire purpose of your life. Every human is valuable because they're a human, not because they can inspire someone else to do something. And so I think there is, for me, I said it early on, it's foundational. When I say I want people to feel seen and heard, I want them to feel seen and heard as a complete person. And I think so often people with disabilities are not seen and heard as a complete person. And so to me, that's kind of what that message is saying on the website. Every person is a whole person. Not all of us, I won't say not all of us, none of us are 100% angel. None of us are 100% inspiration. We all have hard days and things we need help with and moments that we are unpleasant. And, we all have lots of aspects of our identity. The word intersectionality is being used more and more to recognize that within the disability community is every other kind of identity too. Every race, every religion, every sexual orientation, every gender identity, every age, every geography is included as part of the disability community. And it's up to each person how various aspects of their identity show up in who they are. It's not up to the outside world to decide who they are based on what they can see. So I think that's what that message on the website means to me.
Wow, that's so well said. You're on a wall. So here's another one. Different people have different goals, wants, and need different kinds of support. None of us can exist without support. None of us can exist without support. That is why we live in communities. People with disabilities are no different, even if the kinds of support they need is.
Absolutely. I mean, if we think about, I create safety by being transparent, right? A support that I need on a daily basis is a really good cup of coffee. I was not a fully functional person this morning before that cup of coffee. I was on autopilot. I was not communicating well with my daughter. I was basically growling at my husband. And I needed a kind person to put a latte in my hand. And lovingly they did. I can't stand the language high functioning and low functioning. It's often applied to people with autism. But we don't get to decide each other's functionality. Before a cup of coffee, I'm a very low functioning person. But get me well caffeinated and I can accomplish much more. But the support I need before a cup of coffee and the support I need after a cup of coffee look different. And so, humans built communities. Communities didn't exist before there were people. We built them because there was natural support that comes with living near other people. We build hospitals. We build grocery stores. we build banks, we build schools, right? Like we build sidewalks and parks because when more people coexist, we have the opportunity to create more support for each other. And somehow there are some populations, some parts of people's identity that we still believe are fundamentally different because they need support. I just listed 15 ways that I need support. I need that playground for my kiddo. I need the school. I need a babysitter. I need the person who tames my hair. I need my doctor. I need I need my dogs. They're both barking at me from the backyard. It's just that the way support shows up in our lives is dependent on who we are and the context of our lives. I don't think we use the word support enough day to day to just describe the ways that we show up for each other and the ways that we use the resources in our community. So then we use the word support when there's a diagnosis or a label, and suddenly it sounds like something very different than what it is.
I know the times in life where I've tried to do everything on my own have been the most miserable times of my life.
Absolutely.
This one's short, but it's brilliant. It's not special needs, it's different needs.
Yes. Absolutely well said.
Oh, I got that off the website too. No, I didn't come up with that. So could you say just a little bit more about that?
Yeah.
I wish it was mine. It's not mine.
Apparently, I don't know all of the copy on our website even.
What, you didn't memorize the whole website?
Well, one of the things that I need is highly skilled marketing people who write beautiful copy, and other people whose strengths and skills complement mine. I think really that's just saying that we think of some needs as special because they look different than our experience. But in my mind, that just comes back to cultural humility. Just because it looks different than what I need doesn't mean it's special, because that assumes that what I need is normal and what someone else needs isn't. But there's nothing about me that makes what I need the norm. We define that for ourselves. It's normal for me. It's not normal for somebody else. And so what you need is normal for you. And if I need something different, that's going to come across as special for you. So I think it's just a comment about whatever you need in your life is what you need in your life. And none of us function or succeed without support to meet the needs that we have, because we all need something.
I've never thought about it that way, but for someone who uses a wheelchair, that's completely normal. That's as normal as breathing for them. It's just an utterly normal need.
Yes. Absolutely.
I've been part of this work for most of my adult life, but I never thought about that precisely this way until this moment. Perspective shifts are amazing.
And they can happen all the time if, we're just able to talk with people and be curious about the way they see things.
So one thing I noticed when we talked the first time is how Well, and I would say comfortably you listen to that, how well and comfortably you listened and were curious. How did you initially learn to listen well and to be curious?
It's a good question. I know there is nature and nurture in all of us, right? The things that are biological and born in us, and the things that we learn through living. I don't know how much of that was nature. My mother is very good at listening. So some of it may be biological. But I also grew up in a family. I was the youngest of 3 girls. And my 2 older sisters were very, very close in age to each other. And now in adulthood, that means they are the best of friends. But in childhood, that meant a lot of arguing. So while I may have been the youngest by quite a few years, I also was the natural mediator. And I think mediating conflict, I never liked the arguments. So I wanted the arguments to stop. And the best thing I could do to get the arguments to stop was to make sure both of them felt like their story was heard. So I learned to do that. I learned to make sure she felt her story was heard and also understood. And then to make sure she felt her story was heard and understood. To validate both of their feelings at the same time. Because from their lived experience, from their perspective, they were both right. And I think it just became my role in my family, and has continued to be my role. So I tend to lean toward, I want to understand your perspective. I want to hear you, and I want you to feel heard and validated and understood. And then we can move on to the next thing.
Well, I'm glad I asked. It was all fascinating, and talk about how something you learned in childhood has blessed you as an adult. Wow.
Yeah.
So last question I ask all my guests this. So in my work, I talk a lot about the power of doing I am perfect best. And what it means to me is I envision the best I want for my life and for the world and go for it. But when I make mistakes or experience obstacles, instead of giving up or just being frustrated, I try to learn from all that and then once again move forward. What does doing your imperfect best mean to you, Beth Kessler?
Such a good question. It's funny. I am raising a daughter who's now 8. And I started to notice recently how often people use the word perfect. People use it a lot. And every time I overhear her hearing the word, I want to question it. I find myself wanting to say, perfect for you. Because I think it's an impossibility. We all kind of believe it exists and that somehow it's us who's falling short of perfect. But I think my perfect and your perfect can be different things, because really what it means to me is just feels right. And so I'm constantly doing things that after the fact don't feel right. And in those moments, I'm telling myself that was the best I could do in the moment. But if it doesn't feel right, what would it take to feel right? And so sometimes that is an apology. Sometimes that is asking for another chance. Sometimes that is recalibrating and adjusting and doing things differently moving forward. But it's such a good question. Imperfect best.
Thanks much for your vision, your kindness, your desire to help more and more and more and more people feel welcome. Thanks for being you, and thanks for having this awkwardly awesome podcast conversation with me, Beth.
Thank you so much. Thank you for asking the questions you ask and creating a space for these kinds of conversations.
You're welcome. Have a great day.
You too.
Oh, these conversations, I hope you're enjoying them whenever you watch them, whether it's live or we play. Because I sure enjoy them. Each week I find that I'm learning more and hearing more stories that just help me know what it is to be human, know what it is to be kind, know what it is to grow, know what it is to face challenge after challenge after challenge in a graceful way. Wasn't Beth Kessler great? Thanks so much for tuning in. Tune in next week for another episode of Awkwardly Awesome Podcast. Woo! I don't think I've ever done that before. That was fun. Tune in for another episode of Awkwardly Awesome Podcast. Woo! Have a good day. Talk to you later.